This guy was in the parking lot of a graveyard when all of a sudden he captured this on camera. So what do you guys think? Is this real paranormal activity captured on camera? Or was this just the wind causing the swing to move around? And if it was, why were the other ones not moving? Or was this real paranormal evidence captured on camera?
Terrifier 3 is said to be so over-the-top, gory, and grotesque that it nearly made Art the Clown actor vomit on set during filming. This does not come as a shock to me. They said several months ago that big production companies were offering to work with them to make Terrifier 3, but said that they couldn't do that level of gore and that they would have to tone it down. To which the filmmakers said, absolutely not, we're gonna make it even gorier than last time. They're gonna make the bedroom scene in Terrifier 2 look like child's play. But not only am I curious as to what's gonna top the bedroom scene, but I'm also curious as to what the first kill in the movie is going to be, because they said the first kill is going to be the most controversial by far, but it will not be the most gruesome. And of course, as we know, it's gonna be a Christmas slasher, which I'm so excited. I love the idea of horror in the snow and blood on the snow. It's gonna be mwah, chef's kiss. I also got to meet Damien Leone and David Howard Thornton at Monsterpalooza this year. It was so awesome. But yeah, for those who don't know about the bedroom scene in Terrifier 2, just imagine a girl getting all cut up and butchered and then she's literally having salt rubbed into her wounds. Terrifier is the definition of over the top, and I am so excited to see how they top Terrifier 2 with Terrifier 3. I think if anyone could do it, it would be this duo right here.
So we only been scratching the surface this entire time? Archaeologists are constantly finding new chambers in the pyramids that go far deeper than the outer ground level of the base. And they still haven't been able to find the bottom yet, so exactly how deep does it go? Tall obelisks like these have been found all over ancient Egypt, each with a pyramid-shaped tip. And the pointy Egyptian pyramids look much different than all the other step-shaped pyramids all around the world, so I wonder why. Almost every other ancient structure was initially buried when we first found it, like the Sphinx, Göbekli Tepe, and Chichen Itza to name a few. Why did we just assume the pyramids were fully showing at first sight? Just like we discovered with the Easter Island statues, the majority of their height is buried underground, with some important text inscribed on the side. Nowhere is it written how the pyramids were built, so it could very well be written on the buried sides here. Now I know, these buried obelisks would have been mother crackin' enormous, far bigger than what any humans would have been able to move. Let's take a second to compare to this national monument in Wyoming called the Devil's Tower. Very old rock and the only one of its size in the area, thought to be a natural formation. On closer look, it looks oddly like a petrified tree stump with many more like it around the world. Which if that's the case leads to the question, who cut it down? Maybe the same giants who built these massive obelisks, which possibly got buried after worldwide floods only for the tips to be rediscovered thousands of years later by the Egyptians. Even historic texts such as the Bible refer to a race of giants called the Nephilim, and ancient drawings everywhere all too often show depictions of much larger beings. The evidence of these giants is found all across the world, from the pyramids in Devil's Tower to these giant steps in Peru, the plain of Jars in Laos, Easter Island, Nam Madol in Micronesia, this giant knife found underwater near the coast of Madagascar. All ancient discoveries which were either far too big to be practical or even physically moved by ancient humans. Once is an anomaly, twice is suspicious, but this many times all over the world, I think there's something we don't know here.
This young girl was kidnapped, dismembered, and then left for dead. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Mary Vincent. In 1978, Mary's parents were going through a very messy, turbulent divorce. Desperate to get away from it, Mary decided to hitchhike 450 miles to her granddad's house. Just a short few days after arriving there, Mary came over really homesick, and so she decided to make her way back home. Again by hitchhiking, which in the 1970s was very normal and even considered safe. On the 29th of September 1978, Mary is stood on the side of a motorway with her thumb sticking out when a van pulls up, the man inside offering her a lift. Mary accepted climbing into the van, and the man driving introduced himself as Lawrence Larry Singleton, who was in his 50s. The two got to talking, Mary saying that Larry reminded her of her grandfather, and so she began to relax. Tired from the long day that she had already had, Mary ended up falling asleep. When she later awoke, she didn't recognise where she was, but she knew that they weren't going the right way. Larry explained that he was just trying to find somewhere to go to the toilet, and using this excuse, he drove Mary down a dark, desolate, foresty lane. Mary started to become suspicious and worried. When Larry got out of the van, Mary also jumped out. She leaned over to tie her shoelaces, thinking there is a possibility that she might need to make a run for it from this man. As she was tying her shoelace, she would be punched in the back of the head with so much force that it knocked her unconscious. When she finally came around, Mary realised that she had been stripped naked and she was restrained in the back of the van. Her arms were bound behind her back and her legs were tied to the floor of the van. She tried sort of wriggling her way out, but she couldn't. The restraints were too tight. Over the next few hours, Larry would repeatedly rape, sexually assault and sodomise Mary, who was screaming, crying, pleading to be let go. After stopping to take a quick nap, Larry would then cut the restraints off of Mary and drag her out the back of the van. She whimpered to be please let go, and Larry responded saying, quote, "Oh, you want to be set free? I'll set you free." With a firm grip on her wrist and within a split second, Larry extended Mary's left arm and with his other hand using an axe, he hacked off her arm below the elbow. When Mary dropped to the floor, Larry would strike her right arm 4 times before fully dismembering it. Mary would go limp, and believing that she was either dead or close to death, Larry would throw the 15-year-old's body off of the side of a culvert where she dropped 30 feet, breaking 4 of her ribs. He would then mutter to her, quote, "Now you're free." Unbeknownst to Larry, Mary was clinging on for dear life. She was awake and aware throughout the entire ordeal. She knew that if she didn't play dead, then Larry really would kill her, so she had to stop herself from screaming in pain or pleading for her life in order to survive. Terrified that this was some sort of trap and that Larry was stood waiting for her, Mary was frozen in fear and lay contorted and naked at the bottom of the culvert for hours. When she began to feel sleepy, she had to force herself up. She knew that if she fell asleep, she would never wake up. And she couldn't die. She couldn't let this monster attack another girl and get away with it. In order to slow down the bleeding from the 2 nubs on her arms, Mary packed dirt and mud into them and held her arms upright to prevent any further blood loss. She crawled back up the 30-feet bank and ran for 3 miles till she finally found the road, desperate to find help. The young couple would find Mary, took her in and whizzed her to the hospital where she would spend the next month. Here she was able to detail everything to the police, including a description of Larry. With this, they created this photo fit, which was broadcasted all over the news. It would be a neighbour of Larry who saw the photo fit and immediately recognised it that contacted the police, essentially handing Larry in. At his home, police would find cigarettes that had belonged to Mary and burnt remnants of clothes, which again had belonged to Mary. At his trial, Lawrence Singleton would be handed the maximum sentence of 14 years. The judge would comment saying that if he could give Larry more, then he would have, but the law prevented him from doing so. 14 years for kidnapping, raping, dismembering and attempting to murder this 15-year-old girl. As Mary left the courtroom on the final day, Larry pointedly told her, quote, "I will finish the job even if it takes me the rest of my life." Shockingly, Larry would be released from prison after serving only 8 of his 14-year sentence for good behaviour. He would go on to commit a senseless murder only 10 years after his release. I have uploaded that case if you are interested in listening to it. After losing both of her arms, Mary would be fitted with these prosthetic arms. This is how she looks as of 2023.
This is all the news you're not going to see on TV today, but it's going to be simplified in 60 seconds. Scientists have just officially figured out a way to make algae-based plastic that completely decomposes. Okay. NASA is now officially beginning their plans on a project to build a railway station on the moon, expected to be ready for use in the 2030s. Moon train. Professor Brian Cox shut down the flat earth theory in the best way possible with one simple response. I don't know who that is, but here's what he said. He was asked a question about the flat earth theory and he said, "The very simple fact, we've taken pictures of it. I'm lost for words. It's probably the most nonsensical suggestion that a thinking human being could possibly make." Okay, scientists have now issued a warning to Earth as the sun launches its strongest solar flare in a decade. I'm sure you've heard of this, but hey, this is new. Basically, they're saying that the sun is not done yet, and they issued an update yesterday that says a new solar event has erupted. So, Gen Z is now sparking a new debate on everyday clothing item that shows you're old. Okay. Basically, they're saying that if you wear ankle socks, you're old. If you don't have socks that are above the ankle, you're old. Red Lobster is now officially closing at least 99 locations across the entire US, but literally who cares? Nobody eats there, so. I give you these news roundups every day, so make sure you add me and come back to me tomorrow.
The Egyptian artifacts make absolutely zero sense, and archaeologists might just be afraid of being wrong. How is it the further back in time we go, the more advanced they get? Egypt is old. Like, really old. Egypt is so old that even ancient Egyptians studied ancient Egyptian history thousands of years older than them. When the Romans discovered the pyramids, they were older to the Romans than the Romans are to us today. Woolly mammoths still roamed the earth when they were first built. And of course, everyone knows that Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone, or hell, closer to you watching this video right now than she did to the construction of the pyramids. What's strange is that as time went on, their artifacts somehow got less and less advanced. The Egyptian Empire reigned for about 3,000 years, divided into approximately 31 dynasties classified into the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. When we go back to the first 5 or so dynasties, the Old Kingdom, we see impressive feats of design engineering unlike any other. And impressive is an understatement. These are straight up machine perfect down to the micrometer. Like this round vase, perfectly balancing itself dead center on a point no larger than the tip of an egg. Except this isn't your pottery class vase made of clay. It's granite. And granite is harder than steel. That's a fact. Here are the numbers. Here's another vase, slightly chipped, revealing its walls are as thin as a playing card. Another bowl made from diorite, a stone as hard or even slightly harder than granite, whose walls are literally 1/40th of an inch or half a millimeter thick. We have no idea how to make granite pottery like this using known ancient methods, although high-tech machines could probably do the trick. But I don't think you realize how insane it is to suggest that this level of mechanical precision was achieved on granite using primitive tools softer than granite, the official claim. And these are just a few. There were over 40,000 of these artifacts found under the Step Pyramid of Djoser dating back to the 3rd or 4th dynasty, with some suggesting they're actually pre-dynastic, meaning they're even older, and the Old Kingdom Egyptians just inherited them from a previous civilization. Oh, we're in too deep now, Johnny boy. It's only in recent times when we finally analyzed them with modern light scanning technology that we found out how mind-bendingly precise they really are. They took a jar, did some measurements in a lab, and to this day, Egyptologists have no explanation for these results. The top of the vase was 3/1000ths of an inch away from being perfectly flat, something only possible with like CNC machines today. For reference, a sheet of paper is 7/1000ths of an inch thick. A human hair is 2 to 3. This thing was a literal hair away from being perfectly flat. The inside lip of the vase's mouth was 1/1000th of an inch away from being perfectly perpendicular to the top, which is a mathematically flawless right angle. And the entire vase was 13/1000ths of an inch, which is still just like 2 sheets of paper away from being perfectly circular. These are legit CNC machine level perfections, mass produced over 40,000 times on a material harder than steel using copper and stone tools by hand. Oh, and they might be pre-dynastic before copper tools were widely even used. I don't see an ounce of logic in that. Okay, maybe this one was just a fluke, right? A one-off perfect vase as a result of mass producing over 40,000 of them. So they took more into the lab and found even more astonishingly accurate measurements, revealing alleged machine-calculated mathematical use of pi, the golden ratio, and more, again to within thousands of an inch of accuracy. That's like that much. Everything from the flatness of the base, the roundness, and even the uniformity of the thickness of the walls was nothing less of CNC machine perfection. Justifying this by saying they were just really skilled or they had a lot of time does not explain this level of precision with the known tools and methods at their disposal. There are even some vases that are reportedly made from corundum, which is magnitudes harder than granite and sits right behind diamond on the hardness scale. Although this one is for some reason debated, a lot of people claim it isn't made from corundum, but still others insist it is. A single one of these pots would have likely taken weeks, if not months, given modern explanations. Shouldn't there be evidence of their highly precise techniques all over ancient Egypt? Oh, there was this. A hieroglyph outlining the sculpting of an alabaster vase, one of the softest materials ever, softer than marble, and totally possible with their tools. But it's been proven that the technique outlined here would not work with granite. Sure, cutting into huge slabs using rough and painstaking painstakingly slow techniques using those tools might be possible, as we've seen them desperately trying to prove, but the force of friction required to achieve that simply would not be possible on small, delicate artifacts like these, never mind how machine accurate they are. Some of these vases are as small as a thimble, not even practical, and even harder to make, almost like they were just showing off, like, look what we can do. One theory is that these vases were spun on some sort of grinding tool, for which they have no evidence, no recordings of, but that's completely blown out of the water with the lug handles on the sides here. It's pretty obvious that these wouldn't be possible from spin grinding. Absolutely no one can explain how these lug handles were made, which again, lab results showed that they too were perfectly symmetrical and level to each other to within thousandths of an inch. Later dynasties even tried recreating these jars, and although still impressive, are nowhere near the precision of the earlier ones. This level of advanced pottery is said to have reached its peak in the first two dynasties, and then poof, they just forgot how to do it, which leads people to believe these artifacts might be much older than anyone thinks. What if they inherited them from even earlier previous civilizations? And it doesn't end with these. There's also the schist disc, crafted from a single piece of stone. Tell me, what kind of stone can be shaped like this by hand? No one really knows what this is, said to be a bowl or a flower holder of some sort, even though it looks sorta mechanical. Recovered from a first dynasty tomb, and again thought to be even older than that. Then we get to the statues, and these somehow make even less sense. The face of Ramesses at Luxor. Several of these statues were made in honor of the pharaoh Ramesses. Engineer Christopher Dunn noticed that there was something off about these faces. They were perfect, but almost too perfect, and not in a human way. He took a photo of the statue head, made it 50% transparent, flipped it, and overlaid the left side on the right side. Doing this, he discovered the face was perfectly symmetrical. Centerline measurements confirmed this too. It's like half the head was carved, then copy-pasted to the other half. We see consistent eye-to-mouth profile ratios across all of these statue heads, something that we'd likely do with like 3D modeling programs today, computer accurate precision. Same thing with the crowns on their heads, and this wasn't done just once but repeated among many statues. This isn't something that anyone could just eyeball, but experts insist they were all done by hand. Professional sculptor Mike Leckie even wrote in a letter saying that his modern diamond tools would have been well worn out before barely even starting to sculpt something like this out of granite, and states that it would have been borderline impossible to repeatedly achieve this level of accuracy time and time again using only the tools we have evidence of. What machining technologies did ancient Egyptians or even earlier civilizations before them possess that archaeologists just simply refuse to even consider?
Despite weighing 30 times as much as a minivan, a modern tank will stop about twice as quick. Watch how fast this comes to a stop. It's cooking its treads. Straight up cooking them. Okay, maybe not twice as quick, but for something that weighs that much, this is insane. Look at the smugness in these engineers' faces. They know it's gonna work. All of these tanks doing these brake tests could go harder than this too. These are just tests. They don't want to hurt the tank or the crew. But in an emergency situation, I'm sure they could stop way faster than this. Tanks aren't really the slow, menacing creatures that movies make them out to be. They're quite speedy, especially in modern times. They just zip around. So if you're wondering why tanks can stop so quickly, it's a very simple answer. It's because they have treads. They have way more surface area, contact with the ground. Supposedly one time a tank had stopped hard enough that it came up on its front end, like its butt got kicked into the air and a car was tailgating it and it drove into the back of it, and then the tank's butt came back down and squished the car. I don't know if that's a true story because I couldn't find any proof of it, but I saw a story of it and I thought I would share because it sounds interesting. By interesting, I mean I hope it didn't happen because that sounds horrible. Have a good day.
And on the right side was, oh, that's my nose and my mustache on the ground, right by my wrist.
In October of 2016, 61-year-old Lee Brook was hunting in the mountains of Wyoming when he finally spotted and took down an elk. Already exhausted and quite a far walk away from his camp, he decided to leave the elk there and return for the elk meat first thing the following morning, which he did. But when he arrived back there, he noticed something wasn't right. The elk was laying on its other side, meaning something had moved it. And it was at this moment he knew he was in life-threatening danger. A 6-foot-tall, 420-pound grizzly bear had already found this same elk carcass and claimed it as its own. So Lee was now tampering with what this grizzly bear had claimed. Before he could even think about the gravity of this situation, he turned around and saw this gigantic grizzly bear barreling towards him, and he turned to run away, and he didn't make it 2 steps, he says, before this grizzly bear used its jaws to grab onto his backpack that he had on his back and lift him up into the air off of his feet. And as he had him in the air, it used its huge paw to swipe right at his face and knocked him unconscious. After this, it slung him to the ground by his backpack and kind of just continuously mauled him as they both slid down the slope of this mountain 50 yards until finally Lee's body came to a crashing halt when it hit against a large log. And this is where Lee came back to consciousness, and he says he couldn't see very well, but all he knows is that he felt these whiskers brushing against his inner ear and the side of his face, and he knew that this bear was on him. And some voice in his head told him, do not play dead. Despite everything you've heard about how you need to play dead, do not play dead, or you will be killed, because this bear is going to figure out sooner or later that you're not dead yet. So at that point, he uses all his might and stands up, and all he has in his hand is this deboning knife, kind of a small steak knife, butcher knife, and he uses it 4 times and sinks it into this bear. He doesn't know exactly where at the time because he can't see. He says he can see the ground below him, but he cannot see in front of him because of all the blood that is clouding his eyes. But wherever he hits, it's enough to make this bear back off and run away. So in these next few moments, Lee is kind of quickly surveying the ground. He sees his backpack over here to the side in the snow. It's all crumpled up, which he understands why. He knows he was picked up by this gigantic bear in its jaws, so obviously the backpack is just gnarled to pieces. But right beside it, he sees something very shocking and disturbing. Lee saw his nose and mustache all fully intact and attached, just laying in the snow. And at that moment, he realized the extent of what this bear did during those 50 yards that it mauled him down the side of this mountain. So thinking quickly, he grabs it, picks it up, and puts it in his pocket. As he's fleeing, it would take 5 hours of him screaming and trying to hold himself together before finally he was reunited with his hunting buddies, who then called for emergency services. It would take another 7 hours after emergency services arrived to get him to the nearest hospital. Once he arrived there, they took his nose that he had saved in his pocket and attached it to an artery in his right arm to keep it alive and blood pumping into it. It remained there for months until finally they were able to reattach it. Doctors even had to use a portion of his scalp with his hair on his head attached to it to recreate his mustache, as you can see here in this actual photo. But ultimately, Lee never gave up and even went for another hunt on the same mountains, on the same path, to the same exact scene of the attack, where he was mauled 2 years later, just to show strength and bravery.
This is all the news you're not going to see on TV today, but it's going to be simplified in 60 seconds. A public punching bag was just officially installed in New York City so that strangers can let out their anger. And we all just take a moment and realize that this is weird. Humans are weird. A new study at Harvard is now suggesting that aliens might be living among us, just disguised as humans or in a base inside the moon. Okay. So like I just said, they're basically saying that aliens could be disguising themselves as humans just to fit in with us, or they might have come from Earth's future, or they might have descended from intelligent dinosaurs. So adults are now starting to buy dumb phones to get away from social media. Basically, this is a new trend where people are starting to buy flip phones and phones with keyboards and stuff, ones that don't have apps on them so they don't have to use them. I guess they're not going to see this post. The Inside Out 2 movie is officially streaming in theaters right now, and for anybody that's already seen it, can you please let us know if it's good? For everybody that's already heard about this, the once-in-a-lifetime Nova explosion has still not happened, but if you want to make sure you do not miss this, I'm going to be going live, and I'm going to be filming, and I'm going to be posting reminders, so make sure you add me and come back.
A husband standing in the floating remains of his wife. This is the story of 39-year-old Kimon Bisogno and her husband Diego, a couple who learned one another's language just to fall in love and to be able to speak to each other before having a daughter and opening a restaurant together. The three of them had a beach day planned on a September day in 2022 at Plettenberg Bay, South Africa, but only 2 would walk away. Kimon headed out to the ocean in waist-deep water, knowing Diego and 5-year-old Luna would join her soon enough after Luna finished her breakfast back at the motel. But just as Diego and Luna were arriving to the beach, standing on the sand, finally spotting Kimon in the water with her back turned to them, a 14-foot-long great white shark hurled itself at Kimon, mouth open, and engulfed her entire torso in its mouth in the blink of an eye. Only her head and lower legs were hanging out of either side of the shark's mouth. Diego immediately grabbed Luna's head and buried it into his chest to shield her from witnessing this gruesome sight, and the 10 or so swimmers around Kimon instantly scattered, some grabbing their children to run towards the shore as this huge shark shook Kimon from side to side. Everyone, that is, except one elderly man who ran towards the attack to help Kimon, but was rocked by the head of this huge shark as it was thrashing side to side, and this elderly man was sent several feet over, crashing into the water. At this point, the elderly man's wife ran and grabbed him and screamed for him to get back onto the shore, as she refused to also lose him to this great white shark. So now as beachgoers called for emergency services, Kimon stopped screaming, and the great white swam off, her torso in its mouth, and her two separate remains floating on the surface. But not long after that, the shark circled back and returned, only to bite off Kimon's left thigh, taking piece after piece now of her body. And watching all of this unfold, Diego could no longer stand by and just watch this, even though he knew there was no saving the life of his wife. Then he shoves Luna into the arms of the elderly man's wife and ran towards the water to save what was left of Kimon. But at that point, the old man saw what he was planning to do and grabbed him and held him with all of his might, despite his bruised ribs from this shark encounter, and told Diego, think of your little girl and what will become of her if he runs straight into his death as well. This elderly man, along with several other beachgoers who came by pretty quickly, held Diego there until the shark was clearly satisfied and was long gone from the scene, and they let him go. And so when authorities finally arrived, they would find Diego weeping in waist-deep water, standing right in the middle of Kimon's ravaged body.
Oh my God, that's what I look like. Like, how do you fix this? Like, how do you fix this? I didn't realize he had taken off my whole lip.
November 3rd, 2020. Aspiring model Brooklyn Corey walked into an Arizona nutrition shop when an employee approached her and said, "Whatever you are about to go through, you're going to remain positive." This would be an ominous foreshadowing of the living nightmare she was going to experience just 15 minutes later. Brooklyn then left the shop and headed to her cousin's house nearby to have lunch with her. And ironically enough, while she was there, she snapped a selfie of herself and noticed she had a zit on her upper lip and felt very insecure and self-conscious about this. She would even later say she went on to crop her upper lip out of this photo that she took, not knowing just moments after this, she would have no upper lip at all. Brooklyn was then in her cousin's kitchen watching her cousin put away these pots and dishes and happened to notice the pit bull, a pit bull she had known since it was 8 weeks old when her cousin brought it home, one that she had met many times and she would say never showed any signs of aggression or violence towards her, was sitting beside her and her cousin, and so she reached out to pet it. And as she did, she turned around to look at her cousin just for a few seconds and then turned back towards the dog. And as she turned back, all she saw was a blur of fur, gums, and teeth as the pit bull lashed out at her and sank its teeth into her mouth, specifically her upper lip. It would hang on to this lip with all of its strength. So now she begins to grab its head and try to push it back off of her lip, but it is biting down and holding on so tight that it even starts shaking her head a little from side to side. This pit bull would go on to hang from her upper lip for a full minute before she was finally able to pry this dog's teeth off of her face. And as she did, she would later say she saw something fly out of the dog's mouth and go through the air and hit the wall. She didn't know at the time it was her upper lip. All she knew was that she immediately took a big breath. She described it as feeling like someone shoved dry ice up her nostrils. Her cousin took one look at Brooklyn, and all she could say is, "You're going to sue me when you see what's been done to your face." Moments later, Brooklyn was rushed to the hospital where a nurse would throw a rag over her face and say, "Please cover up," because she could not bear to look at her face. Ultimately, the pit bull was put down, and as for Brooklyn, even after multiple facial reconstruction surgeries, she has, for the most part, let go of her aspirations of being a model because it's been very difficult, as you can imagine, to get work. Instead, she's taken up skateboarding.
What happened to Miranda Sings? Colleen Ballinger is a YouTuber best known for her alter ego Miranda Sings. She built her following with a unique style of content.
Hello from the other side.
And from 2008 to the present day, she built a network of over 22 million subscribers across all of her YouTube channels. Not only was she widely regarded as one of the more popular YouTubers in the world, but she was also considered to be one of the more wholesome YouTubers. But in 2023, the truth began to come out, and we learned there might have been something dark going on the entire time. All the way back in 2020, a guy by the name of Adam McIntyre posted a video titled Colleen Ballinger Stop Lying. Back in 2013, Adam had created a Miranda Sings fan account, and through that had interacted with Colleen Ballinger. In this video, he accused her of putting him in multiple uncomfortable situations, including sending him lingerie when he was just a young boy. And over the next few years, this saga would just get darker. Like and follow for part 2. Is there something deeper going on with Nikocado Avocado? Over the past few years, Nikocado Avocado has risen the ranks of YouTube through pure shock value and his unique form of entertainment. And as time went on, he slowly became a villain on the internet. Showing pretty much no self-awareness or remorse for his actions, people began to despise him, and that showed all throughout his comment sections. And then one day, he dropped a bone-chilling statement that would change the way you view him entirely.
2 steps ahead. I am always 2 steps ahead. This has been the greatest social experiment I've come to know.
Not only did he seem to actually have a sense of self-awareness and who he was, he also made the claim that he was basically just playing everyone.
Influence the ants. Brainwash the ants. You.
After this, jokes filled the internet that he would go on a transformation that would shock everyone, and recently he's actually been doing just that, and he seems like a completely different person. Like and follow for part 2. Whatever happened to Shia LaBeouf? Part 1 is already up on my page. In 2020, Shia LaBeouf was set to star in Olivia Wilde's Don't Worry Darling. But quickly he was replaced by Harry Styles, and although the official reason was stated as scheduling concerns, many on set, such as Florence Pugh, claimed that they were not comfortable working with him. Much of this stems from Shia LaBeouf being a method actor, and they claimed he was extremely combative. And this all came at the same time where Shia LaBeouf was being called out for an abusive relationship, and in 2022 he would go on a podcast and speak up on everything that happened. He owned up to everything, claiming that he did, quote, hurt that woman. Since then, LaBeouf has reconciled with his wife, and they even had a kid together in 2022. On the podcast, he said that his wife completely saved his life, and it does seem that he's made a complete turnaround. Now, this obviously doesn't absolve him from everything that he did, but it is good to see that he's apparently turned his life around. And he will be in upcoming films, so we might see a Shia LaBeouf comeback in the coming years. Guys, thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to like and follow.